So people like asking me, so what moments did you realize you had to escape? It was not like I had a moment, like, oh, I gotta escape and do something. It was more like, imagine if you are in a firehouse, inside is burning. What are you gonna do? Jump out of the window, right? You have no option, you just don't think. If you don't do, you're gonna get burned, die. And that's what we literally did with my mother. We just jumped out of that window without knowing where we were getting into. We crossed the frozen river to China. And how could I imagine a place can be actually the worse than North Korea? Apparently China was. It was not worse than North Korea, at least to North Korean defectors. As I wrote in my book, at the age of 13, without knowing what kiss was or what sex was, what I saw was my mother being raped. And what they told me was being sold to wives in China, who couldn't find wives. The China had one-child policy, and they didn't keep enough girls, and they kept only boys. This in the countryside, men disabled physically and mentally, they couldn't find wives. And people like me, like my mother, my sister, they were the being people needed as wives for them. So my mother was being sold for $65, and my price was a bit higher, less than $300. And the reason was because I was a virgin and I was young. I think at that moment, I completely lost my faith in humanity. I couldn't forgive for what people did to me. They were the worst thing for me. They were the most scarce thing in the world. Human beings were the worst to me. I will never imagine I could trust again. After being a slave, going through all that, my father came to China, but he passed away from the colon cancer. 2 years later, after I was living like a slave, a man who bought me let me go. He's in jail right now. His name was Yeonmi. And then my mother had a friend from North Korea. We met a lady, and she told us for the first time that if we go to South Korea, we could become a free person. And I didn't know what free meant at that time. I asked her, what do you mean I'm gonna be free? And she told me that if you go to South Korea, you can wear jeans and you can watch movies. Pretty simple to me, like, wow, really? Because in North Korea, I remember this foreign information came through the black market. But one, we couldn't watch those movies because the governments were not letting us watch it. If we watch them, if we get caught, they send us prison or execution. But second, we don't really have good electricity. So I remember, like, in order to finish a movie in North Korea, actually sometimes takes like 3 months. So when I watch like Titanic or other movies, you think like I watched it one sitting, right? No, it took months to watch a movie. But in China, I heard like if I go to South Korea, I don't get that. I just watch them freely. And to me, that was the concept of freedom. All I had. I didn't know the freedom meant freedom of expression, speech, or freedom of thoughts. But trade-offs to being rescued was actually believing God again. And that was still a big irony to me. These North Korean defectors, they risked everything to go to China and not believe in Kims. But in order to be rescued by these Christianaries, they have to be believing God. And it was not very hard for me because Kim Il-sung was God and Kim Jong-il was Jesus. So I just plugged them in and made perfect sense to me. Okay, God created, His Son loves us, we die for them, great. And I became unbelievable great Christian. But you may not believe, like in front of that, you are possible. You are capable of everything, basically. You do anything. You are going to be willing to believe in anything. Rocks, suns, wind, anything that might save you, you will believe in them. I didn't care what I was believing. I was just ready to give everything to something that was going to save me from that hell. After I proved my faith to the pastor, and they helped us to go to South Korea, and that meant they told us how to go to South Korea. We had one compass with the 5 people in our team. We walked across the Gobi Desert from China to Mongolia. And of course, it was the coldest night, and it was the longest night in my life. That I was not really scared of dying that night, but I was really scared of being forgotten. Imagine if I didn't survive that night, or if I got shot or froze to death like many of my defector fellows do. You will never know I existed, right? You will never ever know who I was. And you still we don't know, these nameless, faceless victims, so many of them. They have more horrifying stories than mine, maybe a million times more. My father doesn't have name, doesn't have face, but he was also another victim of the regime. And I think that I was scared the most, that no one knows, no one cares, no one knows that I lived. After I survived, I arrived in South Korea. And I think that was my second birthday because for the first time, people treated me like a human being. But when I arrived in South Korea, it was not an easy thing because, as I told you, I lost faith in humanity. I was so bitter. I was so angry. I was so resentful. All I had was just anger. And of course, I couldn't trust anything. Suddenly, I arrived in South Korea, and they were telling me Americans are not bastards. And they were telling me that South Korea is a free democracy country. And I'm saying, like, how do I trust you again? I mean, North Korea told me something else, and now how am I going to trust your version of the story? But there was a book that changed me. A book was George Orwell's book, another book, Animal Farm. And in that book, I could see myself. I could see my grandmother in that book, and made everything sense to me that what happened to me, what happened to North Koreans. I think that's when I realized, yeah, now it makes sense what happened, and Kim Jong-un was really bastard.